The living room camera's red status LED stayed steady, while yet the infant's oxygen saturation monitor recorded a sudden drop at 9:14 p.m. The sitter later claimed the child had been asleep for hours, but the footage time-stamped 9:16 p.m. showed a blanket being pressed and lifted in measured intervals. A feeding log still open on the counter listed a precise milliliter count that never reached the bottle. In Columbus, Ohio, on June 2, 2021, the only witness that did not blink asked a single question. How did a healthy toddler lose consciousness in under 60 seconds? Before we dive in, subscribe if you like evidence-driven investigation. The Pine Hollow Nanny Cam Case. On June 7, 2021, Columbus, Ohio witnessed a sentencing that closed a year of forensic questions. Marissa Klein, 24, received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But what drove a sitter with no prior record to a decision that ended a child's life? The crime began on the evening of May 19, 2020, in a ground-floor apartment in the Pine Hollow complex on the city's north side. The parents had installed a discreet camera in a bookshelf speaker facing the playmat and crib, paired with a cloud account that updated every 5 minutes. At 8:47 p.m., the toddler was placed in the crib. At 9:14 p.m., the child's fingertip pulse oximeter, a consumer device connected through Bluetooth, registered a steep desaturation curve. The synchronized video showed Klein entering, closing the blackout curtains, and repositioning the baby blanket with deliberate, repetitive pressure. The sequence lasted under 1 minute, followed by a long period of stillness broken by a single check at 9:28 p.m. When first responders arrived at 9:46 p.m., the sitter reported a sudden, inexplicable collapse. The child was pronounced shortly after arrival at Riverside Methodist Hospital. The autopsy described hypoxic injury consistent with asphyxia in a context of no natural disease. Klein had arrived in Columbus in 2018 after an upbringing in rural southeastern Ohio. School records showed average performance and regular attendance. She completed a brief childcare certificate at a for-profit program and held short contracts with several families through app-based placements. There were no documented juvenile matters, substance citations, or prior arrests. A landlord reference noted timely rent, but frequent complaints about noise. A former employer described meticulous scheduling and an insistence on strict routines. Investigators from Columbus Police Digital Forensics recovered the bookshelf camera's raw cache, which preserved higher resolution frames than the app's compressed stream. A neighbor's doorbell camera captured Klein taking out trash at 10:01 p.m., carrying a small, rigid bag later found in the complex dumpster. It contained a wiped baby monitor SD card from the child's room and a kitchen dish towel with faint saliva DNA from the victim. A time alignment expert established that the pulse oximeter graph and the video overlay matched within a tight few seconds margin, affirming that the desaturation followed the blanket pressure, not a spontaneous event. Phone analysis showed Klein's device placed on the TV cabinet and stationary during the critical window, undermining her claim that she had been in the bathroom. A pediatric pathologist retained by the county explained the lack of petechiae in an infant did not exclude asphyxia and noted minor facial abrasions consistent with cloth contact. Klein was charged as an adult with aggravated murder, and endangering children. The court heard that she had searched earlier that month for how long without oxygen infant and baby monitor overwrite. Defense counsel argued an undiagnosed seizure disorder and challenged the reliability of consumer health devices. The jury returned guilty verdicts for aggravated murder and child endangering. The judge imposed life without parole on the aggravated murder count. and a consecutive term on the endangering count. The sentences merged for practical effect. Post-trial motions on evidentiary grounds were denied. The appellate court affirmed in a brief opinion referencing overwhelming digital corroboration. Klein is currently housed at the Ohio Reformatory for Women in Marysville under a security classification that restricts programming to basic work assignments. State records show no scheduled parole review. The Bramley Nursery recordings. On March 15, 2018, Leeds, England witnessed the imposition of a mandatory life sentence with a minimum term of 27 years. Sophie Maris, 19, was convicted of murder and cruelty to a person under 16. But how does a room full of soft toys become a forensic archive? On the night of August 22, 2017, in Bramley, a suburb west of Leeds, Maris was minding a 9-month-old in a semi-detached house with a narrow back garden. The parents' monitor system consisted of a camera above the cot, a Wi-Fi audio baby monitor, and an iPad app set to flag unusual sound levels. Between 10 and 11 p.m., the app created 12 clips categorized by its machine learning model as "cry with obstruction." The home's smart thermostat recorded a manual bump in temperature that the parents had disabled. A motion sensor in the hallway saw multiple passes in and out of the nursery. The infant was found unresponsive at 11:18 p.m., transported to Leeds General Infirmary, and died in the early hours. The post-mortem cited hypoxic ischemic injury without natural cause. Maris grew up in Wakefield, attended local schools, and began occasional babysitting at 16. She presented as organized, favored schedules and kept a handwritten ledger of hours and payments. In the months before the offense, she had completed a brief course in first aid. Friends mentioned ambitions toward nursery work. There was no noted history of violence or formal mental health treatment. A minor caution for shoplifting at 14 remained sealed. West Yorkshire Police seized the nursery devices and obtained a production order for the cloud backend that stored the flagged clips. A digital audio specialist enhanced the files, isolating a pattern of muffled exertion and intermittent, soft impacts. A toxicology screen of the infant revealed detectable amounts of an over-the-counter antihistamine not recommended for children under 2. The kitchen bin contained an empty blister pack of the same medication bearing Maris's fingerprints. A time-use reconstruction combined the thermostat logs, hallway PIR sensor data, and the app's clip timestamps to show a series of short re-entries to the room. Cellular analysis placed Maris's phone in Do Not Disturb mode, but still connected to the home Wi-Fi, contradicting her claim that she had taken the device outside to make a call. A neighbor's outdoor camera picked up a faint glow from the nursery window at 10:40 p.m., consistent with someone standing close to the cot and blocking the nightlight intermittently. Charged in the Crown Court at Leeds with murder and an alternative count of manslaughter, plus child cruelty, Maris stood trial as an adult. The prosecution emphasized the recorded sound signatures, the drug exposure, and the thermostat manipulation as evidence of an attempt to induce sleep at any cost. The defense posited an undiagnosed respiratory vulnerability and suggested that the medication could have been administered inadvertently earlier in the day. The jury convicted on murder and cruelty. The judge imposed a life sentence with a minimum term calculated at 27 years, accounting for age and aggravating factors, including breach of trust and deliberate obstruction of monitoring. An appeal on the ground that the audio analysis was prejudicial failed. The Court of Appeal described the dataset as objective and probative. Maris is currently held at HMP Newhall. Prison records indicate assignment to education programming. There is no parole eligibility until the tariff expires. The Willow Ridge cloud sink case. On February 11, 2024, Toronto, Ontario witnessed a life sentence with parole ineligibility for 25 years following a bench verdict. Daniela Coe, 27, was found guilty of first-degree murder. But what drove a sitter to ignore the very devices that preserved everything? On the night of January 29, 2023, in a high-rise building near Willow Ridge Road, Coe arrived for an overnight shift with a 10-month-old, whose parents worked alternating hours. The nursery was equipped with a crib pressure mat, a ceiling camera that uploaded clip bursts to a cloud service, and a smart display in the kitchen that mirrored the camera feed. At 2:19 a.m., the cloud account registered the deletion of a folder named Nursery Overnight, and at 2:28 a.m., the service performed an automatic sync that restored the deletion to a hidden album. The crib mat logged a series of weight changes that matched a pattern of leaning and sustained pressure. A stovetop timer, later photographed at 7 minutes, had been set and stopped. When emergency responders arrived shortly after 3 a.m., Coe stated the infant had been unusually quiet and still. Hospital examination at Etobicoke General found a lack of external trauma and no obstructive lesions. The cause of death was certified as asphyxia in a domestic care context. Coe grew up in Scarborough, completed a community college diploma in early childhood education, and worked briefly at a daycare before moving to private babysitting. She maintained a social media presence emphasizing curated routines and sleep training. There were no prior police contacts. Academic references described punctuality and neat record-keeping. A former daycare supervisor recorded concerns about rigidity with nap schedules. Toronto Police Service's Technological Crime Unit imaged the parent's home hub and the sitter's phone. Investigators recovered the restored video fragment, showing Coe repositioning the infant prone and applying sustained forearm pressure through a blanket. Router logs revealed Coe had accessed the camera's local IP dashboard shortly before the deletion event, and the app's backend retained a tokenized record of the delete command originating from her phone. Apple Health data from Coe's device showed a brief spike in heart rate at 2:21 a.m. and a walk from nursery to kitchen and back that aligned with the timer interval. A digital forensics examiner testified that the hidden album was a standard feature triggered by cloud retention policies, not user action. The pressure mat manufacturer provided calibration data that allowed an estimate of force deployment within a narrow range consistent with an adult forearm. The Crown charged Coe with first-degree murder under the Planning and Deliberation Branch, and, alternatively, second-degree murder and criminal negligence causing death. A voir dire addressed the admissibility of the cloud sync artifacts. The judge held that the records were business documents with sufficient reliability and that the seizure warrant properly particularized accounts and time ranges. At trial, the Crown emphasized the sequence of accessing the camera dashboard, the deletion attempt, and the timer as a pacing tool. The defense argued that Coe's actions reflected misguided but non-lethal sleep training, and that the deletion was a panicked response to a child found unresponsive. The court found that the combined digital exhaust, router logs, cloud restoration, and biometric traces proved planning and concealment. The sentence was life imprisonment with parole ineligibility for 25 years, as mandated for first-degree murder. A notice of appeal was filed on the voluntariness of Coe's post-arrest statements, but the conviction rested largely on independent digital evidence. Coe is currently in the custody of the Grand Valley Institution for Women in Kitchener, pending transfer within the Correctional Service of Canada. No parole review is possible until the statutory period lapses. The Glendale Smart outlet case. On September 12, 2022, Glendale, Arizona witnessed a sentence that left no release valve. Riley Hart, 26, received natural life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. But how does a routine bedtime become an evidentiary timeline that will not bend? On the evening of May 3, 2021, in a single-story stucco home near West Olive Avenue, Hart began an overnight shift with a 14-month-old. The nursery held a ceiling-mounted camera, a consumer pulse oximeter sock paired to the parents' phones, and a white noise machine plugged into a smart outlet that reported power use to a cloud account. At 8:41 p.m., the camera recorded the child placed in the crib. At 9:07 p.m., the pulse oximeter graphed a short, steep desaturation. The smart outlet showed a manual toggle of the white noise machine to its highest setting at the exact moment the camera's microphone captured muffled, irregular rustling. At 9:10 p.m., Hart left the room, returned at 9:18 p.m., and remained leaning over the crib for 44 seconds. Emergency services were called at 9:46 p.m. to a report of an unresponsive infant. Death was pronounced at a local hospital after resuscitation attempts. Hart grew up in Flagstaff, completed high school with a focus on childcare electives, and moved to the Phoenix area for work with families sourced through an app. Neighbors described a quiet tenant who jogged in early evenings. Records showed no juvenile adjudications or prior arrests. A former daycare employer had ended Hart's trial period citing overly rigid nap enforcement and poor responsiveness to feedback. Social posts emphasized order and sleep training wins, with photos of tidy nurseries and screens showing white noise apps. Detectives obtained a warrant for the home's cloud-connected devices and Hart's phone. Glendale Police Digital Forensics recovered the smart outlet logs, which recorded spikes in wattage consistent with maximum fan speed, aligned to the desaturation curve from the pulse oximeter. The router's admin interface showed a late evening login from Hart's phone that disabled external alerts to the parents' devices, an action time stamped 8:59 p.m. A neighbor's Ring camera captured Hart carrying a small kitchen bin liner to the curb at 10:02 p.m. In it, police found a soft muslin cloth with the child's saliva DNA and microscopic fibers matching the crib blanket. A biomechanics expert mapped the video's angle and the crib side leaning duration to show sustained downward force inconsistent with benign soothing. An audio engineer testified that the white noise amplitude masked higher frequency distress sounds, but left a low-band signature of exertion. Hart was charged as an adult with first-degree murder and child abuse. The prosecution argued premeditation through device manipulation, disabling alerts, increasing masking noise, and timing re-entries to the crib. The defense claimed a sudden respiratory collapse and challenged the consumer oximeter's reliability. Jurors saw synchronized overlays of outlet wattage, oximeter saturation, and camera frames. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on first-degree murder. The judge imposed natural life imprisonment, finding aggravators in concealment efforts and breach of caretaking trust. The abuse count merged. Appeals challenging admission of smart device logs as business records failed at the intermediate court. Hart is incarcerated at ASPC Perryville under a maximum custody classification. No parole eligibility exists under the sentence imposed. The Krakotta Daylight Monitor Case. On April 4, 2020, Perth, Western Australia witnessed a life sentence with a lengthy non-parole period. Elise Merton, 21, received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 24 years. But what drove a sitter to stage an accident while surrounded by devices that measure falls for a living? On October 6, 2018, in a Federation-style house north of Krakotta Cemetery, Merton arrived for a daytime booking. The infant, 11 months old, had a crib camera and a floor-mounted accelerometer tile the parents used to detect toddler tumbles. At 12:32 p.m., Merton texted the parents that the child had fallen from a changing table. Paramedics found bruising inconsistent with a single impact and a timeline that did not match the infant's cooling curve. Hospital staff noted signs of hypoxic injury without skull fracture. The child died the following day. Merton repeated the changing table narrative to police. Merton grew up in Rockingham, the eldest of three, and volunteered at a church creche. School records reflected reliable attendance and average grades. A community college certificate in early childhood studies was incomplete. There were no prior criminal matters. A supervisor at a discount pharmacy described Merton as meticulous with schedules, occasionally impatient with crying children in the store. Western Australia police seized the accelerometer tile, the nursery camera, and the changing table. The tile's dataset recorded low G footfalls and negligible peak forces during the claimed window, contradicting a fall from the table's height. The camera, positioned at a corner, captured Merton moving the child from the crib to the table at 12:10 p.m. and returning at 12:28 p.m. with a folded towel. Audio indicated a sudden cessation of crying followed by silence. A chemist's report identified diphenhydramine metabolites in the child's blood at levels incompatible with labeled pediatric dosing. Pharmacy CCTV from 2 hours earlier showed Merton purchasing an adult formulation. A time-motion analysis mapped Merton's smartwatch heart rate spike and step count from nursery to bathroom at 12:29 p.m., aligning with a 2-minute period in which the camera lens was covered by a cloth, then removed. A forensic pathologist described asphyxial features without external trauma, consistent with smothering. Charged in the Supreme Court of Western Australia with murder and, in the alternative, manslaughter, Merton stood trial before a jury. The prosecution emphasized the scientific contradiction. If the child had fallen, the accelerometer tile would have registered a measurable peak. It did not. The diphenhydramine evidence, the temporary occlusion of the camera, and the smartwatch data built an inference of deliberate sedation, followed by asphyxia and cover-up. The defense argued panic and negligent handling during a genuine fall. The jury convicted on murder. The judge imposed life imprisonment with a non-parole period of 24 years, citing breach of trust and steps taken to frustrate monitoring. An application for leave to appeal the minimum term was refused. Merton is held at Bandiup Women's Prison. Records show participation in literacy and vocational programs. No parole consideration can occur until the minimum term expires. The Christchurch hidden album sync. On November 21, 2023, Christchurch, New Zealand, witnessed a mandatory life sentence with a minimum non-parole period. Hannah Rook, 28, received life imprisonment with a minimum of 17 years. But how does a deleted night become the most documented hour in the house? On the night of August 14, 2022, in a weatherboard home in St. Albans, Rook babysat a 10-month-old under a routine that included a crib-mounted camera tied to a cloud account, a pressure-sensing sleep mat, and a smart display in the kitchen. At 1:58 a.m., the cloud service logged the deletion of a folder labeled Overnight Nursery. At 2:03 a.m., the account's retention feature populated a hidden album with recently deleted media. The sleep mat registered sustained pressure increases without compensatory movements. At 2:11 a.m., Electrical draw from a smart plug on a white noise device climbed sharply to its maximum. Emergency services were called at 2:27 a.m. The child was transported to Christchurch Hospital and pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The initial narrative was of a silent, still sleeper discovered unresponsive. Rook grew up in Timaru, completed high school, and moved to Christchurch for part-time studies in design. She supplemented income with evening childcare. There were no prior convictions. References described punctuality and an emphasis on structure. A former client ended a trial engagement after complaints of strict nap routines and an insistence on darkened rooms. Police executed search warrants for the home devices and Rook's phone. The cloud account showed Rook's phone as the origin of the deletion command, with IP data matching the home connection. The hidden album contained 3 short clips showing Rook repositioning the infant prone and maintaining forearm pressure through a blanket. Router logs recorded Rook accessing the camera's local dashboard minutes before deletion. A kitchen smart display retained a now playing history reflecting white noise volume increases at 2:10 a.m. Apple Health data from Rook's phone showed a short, rapid walk from nursery to kitchen and back that matched the interval between volume changes and the second clip. The pressure mat manufacturer provided calibration data. An expert estimated force ranges consistent with adult pressure sustained for nearly a minute. A forensic pathologist ruled out natural disease and trauma. Features were consistent with asphyxia. The Crown charged Rook with murder under Section 167 with an alternative of manslaughter. A pretrial hearing addressed admissibility of the hidden album artifacts. The High Court found the records reliable business documents and the seizure proportionate. At trial, prosecutors argued planning and concealment through camera dashboard access and deletion attempts, plus escalation via masking noise. The defense described a misguided attempt at contact pressure, soothing and panic-driven deletion after finding the child unresponsive. The jury returned a guilty verdict for murder. The judge imposed life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years, citing vulnerability of the victim and deliberate interference with monitoring. A notice of appeal was filed on grounds relating to expert calibration testimony. No stay of sentence issued. Rook is housed at Christchurch Women's Prison. Under New Zealand law, parole consideration cannot occur until the minimum term elapses. Any release would be supervised and subject to conditions.